So on page 9 of the prophetic profile, there's toward the bottom, it says themes of the book of Isaiah. And the first one is God as the Holy One of Israel. You guys can see that? Some of you? Did that link work?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So I have just 2 paragraphs that I wanted to maybe read through and then look up some passages in the second paragraph. I've talked about the Holy One of Israel and how Isaiah uses this as the main designation for God. It comes up in Isaiah many more times than anywhere else in the Bible, and I've got the stats listed here. So the first paragraph, the Holy One of Israel is Isaiah's favorite designation for God, using it 25 times compared with only 6 in the remainder of the Old Testament. Isaiah also refers to God as the Holy One 4 times compared to 26 times in the rest of the Old Testament. In Isaiah, mention of God's holiness underscores his separateness, his uniqueness. In this sense, the opposite of holy is common rather than impure. That's an important thought. The opposite of holy is common rather than impure. While both senses of holiness appear in Isaiah, it is the idea of separateness that is stressed. This idea is related to Isaiah's teaching that God is the highly exalted one. He is high and lifted up. He dwells in a high and lofty place, and he will bring down all that has been exalted against him. Israel's impurity, especially in relying on profane, that is, common things that are not God, but which they have exalted to his place by placing their trust in them, is the basis of his judgment upon his people. So Israel's reliance upon common things is the basis for God's judgment on them. That's what the sentence means without that hyphenated break there in the middle. In the book of Isaiah, synonyms for this definition of holy when applied to God include high, majesty, majestic, exalt, exalted, lift up, lifted up. Antonyms in reference to men and women in Isaiah include haughtiness, pride, arrogance of heart, pomp, pompousness, boasting, etc. These words are used of persons and things that are improperly related to the Lord. Accordingly, all that is lifted up against the Lord will be brought low, brought down to the earth. To be properly related to the Lord, one must be humble, contrite, and lowly. The Lord dwells with such. Those who by God's grace recognize their standing before and need of the Lord's mercy will be purified and made holy. The ministry of Isaiah is directed toward producing humility and penitence in his hearers so that they might truly become the Lord's holy people. So why I wanted to look at this first, all right, now is because we're still in chapter 2 and we're going to be going into chapter 3. And last week we talked about one of the main themes, if not the main theme or point in chapter 2, which is that God will bring down all of the high and lifted up things of man. All the haughtiness and arrogance of man will be brought low and humbled because he is the Holy One. So it goes with this definition in this paragraph that God being the Holy One means he is the high and lifted up one. He is the lofty one. He is the exalted one. And so anything that competes for that in our hearts, God will put down even further. It will show us how unreliable it really is. And that's what's happening in Isaiah 2, or that's what's being predicted that God will do. And then God eventually does that through the destruction of the kingdom of Judah, all the way through the destruction of Jerusalem, and then the raising of the temple and the exile of the people. And that wave of exiles happens at least in 7 different deportations. So there's a big breaking down of the social order that just goes on in Isaiah's time, or actually in the time following Isaiah, but what he's prophesying about. That has to do with the Lord removing all of the things that God's people relied upon and thought gave them their identity and their purpose, and was the things that they trusted that were not him. So he strips those all away. And in the end, he preserves a remnant of people who cling to him and gives the promise that in New Testament times, he will greatly multiply that remnant by sending the faith out. So That's what I had there. Any comments about the things I wrote about there in those paragraphs? Okay, so we'll come back and look at those probably. I have a link there to some passages about everything that is lifted up against the Lord would brought low, brought down to the earth. We'll come back and look at that in a minute, in a few minutes. Let's read Isaiah 2, 5 through 22. And if you're looking at the outline, if you're looking at the one online, I've got the passages linked to Bible Gateway. Just got to click on that. I see Alicia's desperately trying to use printed copies. So the printed copy of the outline is definitely not up to date unless you just printed it, because I made changes like half an hour ago. As is normal. So Isaiah 2, 5 through 22. Yes, Mom.
So while Alicia's finding her place, so when I want to go back to the prophetic profile just for a minute.
Yeah.
God as the Holy One. If that underscores his separateness, his uniqueness, rather than his purity. Not that he isn't pure. When it talks about us being holy, it's the Bible is talking about us being separate and unique.
Right.
Correct?
Exactly.
And is that true throughout the Bible?
Yes.
That that's the proper use of the word holy?
Well, yeah, so I would clarify just to say that holiness includes both of those ideas. Being pure morally and being separate. But the purity arises from being separate. You are separate from the common and the profane. And so that means you are holy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a word, in the case of God, it stresses this utter uniqueness, right? As being completely separate from even all of the creation. And so he's not limited, and you could use it in that way too. Yeah, good question. So I've just put a link to the most recent outline in the chat if you want to use that. So
well, also too, there's the word sanctified means set apart, and we are sanctified. So wouldn't holiness be a subcomponent of sanctification?
Yeah, sanctification is actually the word for sanctify is a form of the word for holy. It's the same. It's basically the same word. Yeah. So Alicia, if you have access to the link I just posted, that has the most recent outline in it, and you would just search on start once you open that, and it'll get to where we are. So Isaiah 2, 5 through 22, O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. For you have rejected your people, the house of Jacob, because they are full of things from the east, and are fortune tellers like the Philistines, and they strike hands with the children of foreigners. Their land is filled with silver and gold. There is no end to their treasures. Their land is filled with horses. There is no end to their chariots. Their land is filled with idols. They bow down to the work of their hands, so that to what their own fingers have made. So man is humbled, and each one is brought low. Do not forgive them. Just a quick comment on verse 9. It's has two different ways you can take it. I think they're both legitimate. One is that God will judge man and bring him low. And that would go with every other statement that we're going to read in chapter 2 about God going to do that. But the other one, I think, is just the ironic. It's the point that Paul makes in Romans 1 when he says people who exchange the image, they exchange God for images, that look like crocodiles and insects and things like that. And his point, Paul's point is that in the order of creation, man is the highest, mankind is the highest, and an insect is really low, and a tree is lower than that, and dirt is, lower than that. And so if you are submitting yourself to an insect or a crocodile, you are disrupting the very nature of your created order. You're brought low. Yes, Mom.
Oh, I was struck by this verse last week when we read it. Do not forgive them. And I thought, okay, God is all about forgiveness, but if someone sins against us, we are to forgive them.
Mm-hmm.
If someone sins against God, we are not to forgive them.
Oh, I don't think it's a call for the people to not forgive other people. I think that this is addressed to God. You can see in verse
an
6.
imprecatory. It's kind of an
Yeah.
imprecatory statement, right?
God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In verse 6, he's speaking to God.
Right.
He
He's
changes.
speaking to God.
Yeah. So, and this is echoed. Maybe there's not a literary tie, but there's a thematic dotted line between this and Jeremiah. 100 and something years later, right before the fall of Jerusalem. God says to Jeremiah, "Don't pray for these people."
Mhm.
Right?
He's not going to listen.
He's not going to listen. Yeah, because he's done. I mean, it's basically yeah. So a person who sins against the Lord, the person who blasphemes the Son can be forgiven, but not the one who blasphemes the Spirit. And so the unforgivable sin, right? So I'm thinking that probably what's going on here is that the Spirit has been giving clear word to them through the prophets and through their past history, which they know, and all of that, and they are rejecting that. They're rejecting the ministry of the Spirit, and they're calling it evil. This is what the people did in Jesus' ministry. And so it comes to the point there, it's like the clear revelation of God you are rejecting. I find it fascinating that Jesus says, right in that passage about the unforgivable sin, he's standing there and he says, you can reject me, and that could be forgiven. He's not talking about salvation. I mean, obviously you have to come to him for salvation, but he's saying, if you reject me today, you could still come to salvation. God can still have mercy on you. But if you reject the Spirit, who's making my message and my identity known to you supernaturally, that's the last line. There's nowhere else, right? So God is sending his last prophets who are representations of the Spirit, and they are speaking the word of God, and they're being rejected. And at that point, then God says, no, that's it. So I think that's what's going on there. So verse 10, enter into the rock and hide in the dust from before the terror of the Lord and from the splendor of his majesty. The haughty looks of man shall be brought low, and the lofty pride of man shall be humbled, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day. See, they're all spatial, relational, haughty, high, low, humbled. It's up and down language, right? Positional. Verse 12, for the Lord of hosts has a day against all that is proud and lofty, against all that is lifted up, and it shall be brought low, against all the cedars of Lebanon, lofty and lifted up, and against all the oaks of Bashan, against all the lofty mountains, and against all the uplifted hills, every high tower, and against every fortified wall, against all the ships of Tarshish, against all the beautiful craft. And the haughtiness of man shall be humbled, and the lofty pride of man shall be brought low, and the Lord alone will be exalted in that day. And the idols shall utterly pass away, and people shall enter into the caves of the rocks and the holes of the ground from before the terror of the Lord and from the splendor of his majesty when he rises to terrify the earth. So that sounds almost hopeful there, that the idols are going to pass away, right? But this is going to be repeated a little bit later with a little more information. In that day, mankind will cast away their idols of silver and their idols of gold, which they made for themselves to worship, to the moles and to the bats. Still sounds like it could be good, but then to enter the cave, the caverns of the rocks and the clefts of the cliffs, from before the terror of the Lord and from the splendor of his majesty when he rises to terrify the earth. They throw away their idols because they figure out they can't do anything. They're not going to save me. But instead of doing what the prophets have been telling them to do for hundreds of years, which is throw yourself on the mercy of God, who is in covenant with you and will save you, they go hide in the rocks.
Mhm.
They say, no God can save me. And so they get destroyed. Right? They don't do what they're supposed to do. They've rejected the word of God. So the verse 22, stop regarding man in whose nostrils is breath, for of what account is he, is the application of the word. And the word that we just read is about God is going to take away everything and everybody that you trust in, that you look to for security, for comfort, for hope. He will make, they are all unstable, and he will take them all away. And they are all men and the works of men. And so stop trusting in them. Right?
Mhm.
Why go through all this? Just stop trusting in men. So that's the application of chapter 2 there. And so having read that, let's go back to the prophetic profile and look at those lists, that list of passages there, which is on page 10. And the first one is Isaiah 2:2 and 9 and 11. So we've read some of these. So we're thinking about the idea of high and low. Those are the things we're thinking about. Isaiah 2:2, it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and it shall be lifted up above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. So we have high, lifted up. This is the holiness language. This is the proper language to be applied to God and the things of God. This doesn't actually have to do, in this passage, doesn't necessarily have to do with a geographical movement of a mountain being made higher, but it's about in your heart, the house of the Lord is the highest. Isaiah 2:9, so man is humbled and each one is brought low. Do not forgive them. We read that. We read 11, the haughty looks of man shall be brought low, and the lofty pride of men shall be humbled, but the Lord alone will be exalted in that day. 12, for the Lord of hosts has a day against all that is proud and lofty, against all that is lifted up, and it shall be brought low. 17, and the haughtiness of man shall be humbled, and the lofty pride of men shall be brought low. The Lord alone will be exalted in that day. Isaiah 5:15, man is humbled, each one is brought low, and the eyes of the haughty are brought low. Let me just mention, and again, in the organization of the book of Isaiah, chapters 1 through 5 are kind of the preface, and chapter 6 begins with the call of Isaiah to the ministry. So chapter 5 kind of sums up again, returns to this theme. Actually, that theme, it's the theme of the entire section 1 through 5 is man will be humbled and the Lord will be exalted. It's brought to. And every time you read, man is going to be humbled, you can just add the Lord will be exalted. And every time you read that the Lord will be exalted, you can just add man will be humbled, because they're two sides of the same coin. Isaiah 10:33, behold, the Lord of hosts will lop the boughs with terrifying power. The great in height will be hewn down, and the lofty will be brought low. So we read in chapter 2 about the trees of Lebanon, cedars. God doesn't, he's angry with them. Not actually trees, it's the people's reliance on help from foreign countries, things like that, represented by the produce coming from these countries. And God's saying, I'm going to bring it all down. Isaiah 13:11, I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant and lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless. Verse 14:8, Isaiah 14:8. The cypresses rejoice at you, the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since you were laid low, no woodcutter comes up against us. So that's kind of ironic there. Isaiah 14:14-20. I guess I'll say this. Some people think this is about Satan and his fall. It's not, but it's if you look at the full chapter, which it's about the fall of the king of Babylon. But we can look at that a little later if anybody has a question. But verse 14, Isaiah 14:14, I will ascend. So what the king of Babylon said, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Those who see you in Sheol will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook the kingdoms, who made the world like a desert and overthrew its cities, who did not let his prisoners go home? All the kings of the nations lie in glory, each in his own tomb, but you are cast out, away from your grave, like a loathed branch, clothed with the slain, those pierced by the sword, who go down to the stones of the pit, like a dead body trampled underfoot. You will not be joined with them in burial, because you have destroyed your land. You have slain your people. May the offspring of evildoers never be named. So another imprecatory thing at the end there. So he's pretty low. That's the whole point, right? He's not even dead on the ground or trampled underfoot. He's down. He's so low that the people in Sheol go, man, what happened to him? And it's because he exalted himself. God says, well, you've exalted yourself. You wanted to be the highest. I'm going to make you the lowest. Isaiah 17:4. And in that day, the glory of Jacob will be brought low, and the fat of his flesh will grow lean. Isaiah 25:11. Here's a image for you. And he will spread out his hands in the midst of it as a swimmer spreads out his hands to swim. But the Lord will lay low his pompous pride together with the skill of his hands. Anybody know where he's swimming? If you look at the verse before that. For the hand of the Lord, verse 10, the hand of the Lord will rest on this mountain, and Moab shall be trampled down in his place as straw is trampled down in a dunghill, and he will spread out his hands in the midst of it as a swimmer spreads his hands out to swim. That's pretty low.
Swimming around in a pile. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I'm not sure which image is more poignant, the guy in Sheol being wondered at by everybody else in Sheol, or this. This is pretty low. Isaiah 25:12. And the high fortifications of his walls he will bring down, lay low, and cast to the ground to the dust. Isaiah 26:5. For he has humbled the inhabitants of the height, the lofty city. He lays it low to the ground, casts it to the dust. Isaiah 29:4. And you will be brought low. From the earth you shall speak, and from the dust your speech will be bowed down. Your voice shall come from the ground like the voice of a ghost, and from the dust your speech shall whisper. Some people have read this passage and said, oh, they're going to be, alive, resurrected, all that kind of stuff. No, the point is they're going to be really low. Isaiah 32:19, and it will hail when the forest falls down, and the city will be utterly laid low. Isaiah 57:15. So the ones we've just read show that the idea of the two ideas of exaltation, and arrogance and haughtiness of men, and then the Lord bringing them low, that those things are a main focus in the book of Isaiah. They go throughout the book, and the Lord is always using this language about with this language which has up or down direction, to it, where he says high, lofty, and then he'll say humble and low, things like that, and then the synonyms of arrogance, humility, things like that. So Isaiah 57:15, for thus says the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly, and to revive the heart of the contrite. So you see the two things are here too. But the Lord isn't bringing these people down because they're already down. They already have a lowly heart, a contrite heart before him. They're not exalting themselves or anything inappropriately. They hold him as the high and exalted one. His name is holy, the high one, the exalted one. And so the Lord is looking for worshipers and creating worshipers like that, right? So it's still the same language, but what we find out by comparing all the passages that we went through, and then this one, is that the Lord is bringing people down, not just for the fun of throwing them to the ground, but to create worshipers who will worship him in spirit and in truth, in this lowly, contrite, humble manner. And so they know who they are before the Lord, and they know who the Lord is. So and I know this is one of, most people love this verse. If they know about this verse, they love this verse. The last one I have here is Isaiah 66:2. The Lord says, all these things my hand has made, and so all these things came to be, declares the Lord. But this is the one to whom I will look, he who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word.
Mhm.
So the problem in Isaiah, which is repeated over and over again, one of the main problems is that we trust in the wrong things. Like God's people have trusted in the wrong things, and they hold on to them. They hold on to them until the Lord shows them that they are unstable and cannot provide the support and the protection, and they cannot deliver them. And so, but this movement is talked about as men exalting things, either themselves in pride or something else they exalt, and the Lord bringing those things low. And then the application is you should have a contrite heart. You should be low, and hold the
Chuck?
Lord as exalted. Yes, Catherine.
I need some clarity, please.
Yeah.
You said when you spoke of Isaiah chapter 14,
Mhm.
verses 14 to 20,
Yeah.
that many people have been told or think that these verses are in regard to Satan. Is that what you said?
I did say that. Yeah.
Okay. And I was taught that. But you also said that these verses are in regard to the fall of the king of Babylon. Is that right?
I did say that. Yes.
Okay. Now, can you give me a little bit of clarity as to why I was taught the wrong thing and this is the correct thing that you're saying now? How
Yeah.
can I make that clarity between being taught the wrong thing and now receiving the truth?
Right. So, all right, very good question. So let's look at Isaiah 14. So I'll go over there, and we'll look at
Okay.
start in verse 3, and we'll probably read the whole thing again, because the answer to your second question, why were you taught that, is in the wording. It's in the wording. But verse 3 says, speaking to people of Judah who are going to go into exile, and then this is says, when the Lord has given you rest from your pain and turmoil and the hard service with which you were made to serve, that is, in Babylon, you will be made to serve in Babylon, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon, not against the devil, against the king of Babylon. How the oppressor has ceased, the insolent fury ceased. So this is predicting, Isaiah is going to, or does often, after he predicts that Babylon's coming to destroy Judah and take the people into exile, the Lord graciously then also predicts through Isaiah that the Lord will then judge Babylon. He says he's going to do that through Cyrus in Isaiah 45, and that Babylon, or Cyrus, will then destroy Babylon and then let the captives go. So the Lord will release them back into their own land, and he will restore them and restore a remnant, etc. So these are the promises that are being referred to, but obviously this is pre-captivity. The captivity is still 120, 100 years away at this point. So, so the release then, which is spoken of in verse 5, is further away than that. But verse 5, the Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of rulers that struck the peoples in wrath with unceasing blows, that ruled the nations in anger with unrelenting persecution. It's talking about Babylon. The whole earth is at rest and quiet. They break forth into singing. The cypress rejoice at you, the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since you were laid low, no woodcutter comes up against us. Sheol beneath is stirred up to meet you when you come. Well, who's the you? Well, it's the king of Babylon. That's verse 3 is what this is about. Sheol is stirred up to meet you when you come. It rouses the shades to greet you, all who were leaders of the earth. It raises from their thrones all who were kings of the nations. So some of these would be kings which the king of Babylon defeated in battle and killed. And they're in Sheol. That's the picture. And they're standing up in amazement that he is now, this great ruler who defeated them, he is now in Sheol. And then they're further amazed that he's now lower than they are. All of them will answer and say to you, you too have become as weak as we are. You have become like us. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol. The sound of your harps, maggots are laid as a bed beneath you, and worms are your covers. And this is the next part where people read this and they go, no, this is about the devil. But the referent has not changed. We do not have an introduction of a new subject here. It's just the continuation. How you are fallen from heaven. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn, how you are cut down to the ground, you who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to Sheol, to the far reaches of the pit. Those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. See, it's the same thing. He's just saying what he already said. It's the same subject. There's no change. Verse 16, those who see you will stare at you and ponder over you. Is this the man who made the earth tremble? See, it's a man, not Satan, who shook kingdoms, who made the world like a desert and overthrew its cities, who did not let his prisoners go home, didn't let the Jews go home. All the kings of the nations find glory, each in his own tomb. You are cast out away from your grave like a low branch, clothed with the slain, those pierced by the sword, who go down to the stones of the pit, like a dead body trampled underfoot. You will not be joined with them in burial, because you have destroyed your land, you have slain your people. May the offspring of evildoers never more be named. Prepare slaughter for his sons, because of the guilt of their fathers, lest they rise and possess the earth, and fill the face of the world with cities. I will rise up against them, verse 22 declares the Lord of hosts, and I will cut off from Babylon name and remnant, descendants and posterity, declares the Lord. And I will make it a possession of the hedgehog and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the broom of destruction, declares the Lord of hosts. This whole thing from verse 3 to 22 is about Babylon. So,
it is indeed. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Wouldn't it be correct and not to say that he used the fall of Satan to illustrate the fall of the king, the Babylonian king?
I don't believe that's correct, and this is why. When people teach about the fall of Satan, which only some branches of the Christian church do that, because only some branches of the Christian church think this is about the fall of Satan. There is no other passage in the Bible that could possibly be about the fall of Satan. They go to this passage. So they go to this passage and they say, this is the fall of Satan. And then they say something like the fall of the king of Babylon is modeled after the fall of Satan. They might say that. And then you say, well, how do you know that? Because this passage is about the fall of the king of Babylon. That's what this passage says. It says nowhere that it's about the fall of Satan. So how do you know that this is modeled after the fall of Satan? And then they go and they say, because it says he was in Eden. You go, have you never heard of picturesque language? The subject doesn't change. Subject is the same all the way through. So
So Chuck, I don't want to like blur the lines, but if you did want to, I mean, there's, you could, I think it's fair to say that Satan has some sort of association with what's being described and going on here, in that he probably has influence on the king of Babylon, and Babylon as a sort of a satanic, it's rebellion from God is the basic symbol of Babylon, right? So, Satan is involved in what's going on here, but this isn't saying anything about, it's not like prophecy about Satan or explanation about what happened to Satan. It's just somebody that was under Satan's rule did these things or is being judged in this way, right?
Yeah, you could say that. And so I would just also make this statement that there is actually, there is no place in the Bible that gives us details about the fall of Satan. Not even the Revelation, not even Revelation 12, which or Revelation 12, right? The great dragon swept his tail and a third of the stars fell. That's not about the fall of Satan. So, and that's the only other place.
Assumed in the same way the existence of God is assumed in right from the first word.
Right. So the Bible doesn't give us. So there's a question in philosophy and also in theology which is unanswerable. I mean, there's probably more than one, but this one is called theodicy. Theodicy. Where does evil come from? The Bible does not answer that question. There is no place you can go and find out where does evil come from. Now, if you ask where does sin come from, that's answered. But where does evil come from? Where does evil come from? Because there's nothing in the Bible that tells me about the origin of Satan. I know that Satan was a good angel. He was an archangel. His name was not Lucifer, by the way, because that just means morning star, and it didn't refer to Satan in the passage where it comes up. From
the Vulgate, is that?
Yeah, from the Vulgate. Yeah, from the Latin Vulgate, 4th century Latin Vulgate translation. Anyway, so the Bible doesn't tell you about the origin of evil or the origin of Satan. It doesn't answer the question. Like, here's a question, right? So Adam is created with a will that is not like mine. Adam's will is inclined fully to serve God. Now, I'm not saying it's confirmed in perfection, but it does not have a taint of rebellion, right? Whereas my fallen will, not my will being remade in Christ, but my fallen will is rebellious. It's always rebellious. Adam didn't have a rebellious will. He had a will that's the mirror opposite of a rebellious will. It was a will that wanted to do what God said. Well, then how did he fall? I mean, we read about the fall, but there's no real explanation of how did a will that had no evil in it become evil. So anyway, the question about theodicy, or where does evil come from, is not answered by the Bible. And that goes to Adam's fall and also speaks about Satan's fall. People say, well, he was really proud and that's why he fell, but they're getting that out of this passage. They're not getting it out of another passage. So,
I mean, that seems like something that's so clearly in the realm of God's, what is it? The secret decree, secret will
of God, Deuteronomy. Yeah. So there's things that God hasn't told us, and so I would say it like this: that there's really that there's probably no danger in reading Isaiah 14 and thinking that this is describing the devil. There's probably really no danger, but the danger is that you miss that it's actually talking about the king of Babylon.
Amen.
Mhm.
Why the Lord has it in there.
Yeah.
Who's this really talking about? Sometimes man can really, as Mike just said, sometimes you're not you, Mike, but man generally sometimes can muddy the waters, and just their
Right.
thought or whatever can just take it off on a tangent. And that's not what the Lord wants us to do. He wants us to know exactly what he's telling us. I do
Right.
appreciate this from you very much, Chuck. This is good, because I've been in classes where this has been, yeah, that's the devil, all right. Like,
Right, I
it's
have too.
just a sure thing. Well, it's not. So I'm thankful. Thank you very much, Chuck.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And the other thing too about humanity, which is so interesting, and I know we're at the end of our time, but it's so interesting, is that I know Catherine reads her Bible every day, and she's read Isaiah 14 more than once.
I have.
And
Yes,
every
I
time,
have.
and ever since you were taught that this was about Satan, every time you read it, you see that,
I do.
because your
You're
mind,
right, absolutely.
your mind will take contrary information, like verse 3 and verse 22, and the verse where he's called a man. But we'll take that contrary information and we'll suppress it,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And
Yes.
because the mind is all about being consistent, right? You don't want to create cognitive dissonance. You want to have you want to be able to think comfortably, right? And so your mind is like on guard against things that might shape your thoughts, and then you have kind of a reverberation where you have to change some things, and that's just natural. That's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of the
Oh.
passages people do that with. There's another passage which is really fun, where people do it. It's Jude verse 5. Let's look at that real quick and then we'll end. Jude 5. So I'll read it, and then I'm going to ask a question, and if you know the answer, don't answer. If you just think you know the answer, go ahead and answer. Now, I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe. Okay, don't look at the passage. Who's the person who saved the people out of the land of Egypt and afterward destroyed those who did not believe?
The Lord.
Okay, the Lord. Yeah, some translations say that, so we'll go with that. Anybody? Is anybody using the ESV?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
Jesus was the one who did it.
yeah, Jesus. Yeah, there's a textual variant, and the most attested reading, the reading that most scholars, like with 99.9% certainty, say what it says in the original of Jude is that Jesus saved the people out of the land of Egypt and afterward destroyed those who believe. And seriously, I've sat with people and had them read that out loud to me, and then I asked them who led the people out of Egypt, who is, and they go, oh yeah, I say who saved those people out of Egypt and then destroyed those who do not believe, and they go, God. I go, okay, read it again. I'm going to ask you, read it 3 or 4 times. It's right there in the text, because your mind just doesn't want to see that. It doesn't make sense to you.
Right, you're in Old Testament mode when you're reading this, right?
Yeah. So, but some translations say Lord there, and that's the second most popular reading. But the one that makes the most sense, looking at the textual manuscripts that we have of Jude, is Jesus. It's the most widespread, and it's the oldest. It's in the oldest manuscripts that we have. So very interesting. So it's typology, right? It's typology that is being employed here by the Lord through Jude. Very interesting. So, but we do that. We like to keep things, protect our thoughts. You got to work really hard at identifying your presuppositions and saying, I'm going to try to put those, I'm try and be aware of what I'm trying to protect so that I can overlook it, so that I can look past it, actually see what's there. Okay. Any other thoughts before we end today?
Well, you can explain it next week, but next week, if we could start out, I have a couple things about Isaiah 25:10 that I've heard.
Okay. All right. We will talk about that next week. All right. Thanks, Shirley. All right, let me stop the recording and then we'll pray.